lifetime of searching. The fire may have ended that night, but for the Sodder family, the nightmare was only beginning. No bones, no answers. In the smoldering ruins of the Sodder home, grief turned quickly into obsession. When the smoke cleared, the mystery deepened. There were no remains. 5 children were said to have died in the fire. Yet, after hours of searching through the ashes, firefighters found nothing, not even a tooth. Jenny Sodder couldn't accept that. She was a mother. She knew what fire did. But even instinct wasn't enough, so she turned to science. She began burning bones herself, small animal bones, taken from the farm, testing what heat could really do. They never disintegrated completely. Even after hours in the flames, fragments remained. Then came the confirmation. The Sodders contacted an Ohio crematorium. The response was sobering. Even after 2 hours at 2,000 degrees, bones do not vanish. Yet the fire at their home, burning for far less time and at much lower temperatures, left not a trace. Something was wrong. There was no smell of burning flesh, neighbors recalled. That alone felt off, considering the supposed scale of the loss. Even seasoned firefighters couldn't explain the absence. Some quietly admitted they'd expected to find at least some skeletal evidence, especially of 5 children who had supposedly perished. The official explanation grew weaker with each passing day. Investigators tried to close the case. The fire was blamed on faulty wiring, but George had just had the wiring inspected. Even stranger, if the wiring had failed, why did the Christmas tree lights stay lit during the fire's early minutes? The deeper the Sodders looked, the more hollow the narrative became. For Jenny and George, the absence of bones didn't suggest death. It suggested escape, or worse, abduction. And soon, that suspicion found its footing in a series of startling events that would completely reframe the tragedy. Clues in the chaos. In the early hours of December 25th, while fire consumed the Sodder home, the rest of the world slept, or at least appeared to. But as details surfaced, it became clear. Someone else had been awake, watching, acting. A local telephone operator confirmed the Sodder line hadn't burned. It had been cut. That distinction mattered. Flames could destroy wires, but not clean, deliberate severing. Then came the reports of a man, unfamiliar, uneasy, stealing block and tackle equipment from the Sodder property just before the fire. Another neighbor remembered hearing metal clanging around the house that night, the sound of someone tampering, not escaping. Perhaps the most explosive detail was unearthed later. In the dirt behind the home, a charred object, a replica of a napalm grenade, the kind used in World War II. Was it military surplus? A homemade incendiary? Either way, it was something that had no business near a quiet family home on Christmas Eve. More confusion surrounded the fire's origin. The official report claimed faulty wiring, but multiple witnesses said flames seemed to erupt from the roof, not the basement, where wiring would normally fail. If so, the source of the fire had come from above, not below. That changed everything. George believed it was arson, planned, targeted, and timed for maximum destruction. And as he dug deeper, the theories only grew darker. What if the fire was meant to erase evidence? What if the kids weren't killed, but taken? These weren't wild ideas anymore. They were forming a pattern that whispered of a crime, not a disaster. And then...
Have you ever heard a story so baffling, so heartbreaking, that it stays with you long after you've heard it? Well, get ready, because today we're diving into one of the most enduring and perplexing mysteries of the 20th century, the disappearance of the Sodder children. This isn't just a local legend. It's a case that has puzzled investigators and fascinated armchair detectives worldwide for over 75 years. It all began on Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder were a respected Italian-American couple with 10 children. They were living the American dream. That night, 9 of their children were home. The oldest sons, John and Joe, were already back from serving in the military. The 5 youngest, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, begged to stay up a little later to play with the new toys their older sister, Marion, had bought them. Their mother, Jenny, agreed, reminding them to do their chores before heading to bed, and then went to sleep with her husband, George, and their 2-year-old, Sylvia. It was a scene of holiday warmth and family joy, the last one they would ever experience together. Around 1 a.m., Jenny was woken up by the phone ringing. It was a wrong number. As she was heading back to bed, She noticed the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. She assumed the kids were still up, so she turned off the lights, locked the door, and went back to sleep. But just half an hour later, at 1:30 a.m., she woke up again, this time to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., managed to escape the rapidly spreading flames, but the 5 children who had stayed up late were trapped on the second floor. Panic set in. George rushed to get his ladder to rescue the children from their upstairs bedroom window, but it was inexplicably missing. It was usually propped against the side of the house, but now it was gone. His next thought was to drive one of his coal trucks up to the house and climb on top of it to reach the window. But inexplicably, neither of his trucks would start. Despite having worked perfectly just the day before, desperate, they tried to get water from a rain barrel, but the water was frozen solid. A neighbor tried to call the fire department from a nearby tavern, but the operator couldn't be reached. Another neighbor drove into town to find the fire chief, F.J. Morris, who initiated a phone tree system to gather volunteer firefighters. Since the town's department was small and under-equipped, by the time the fire department finally arrived at 8 a.m., a staggering 7 hours after the fire started, the Sodder family home was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash and rubble in a basement crater. The 5 children were gone. The official assumption was immediate and grim. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty had tragically perished in the fire. Fire Chief Morris told the distraught parents that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate their bodies, leaving no remains. The death certificates were issued just a few days later, listing the cause of death as fire or suffocation. For most, that would have been the end of a terrible tragedy. But for George and Jenny Sodder, it was the beginning of a lifetime of questions. The Sodders simply could not accept that the fire had consumed their children without a trace. Jenny, who had worked at a crematorium, knew that it took hours of intense heat, far hotter than a typical house fire, to turn human bones to ash. And what about the smell? She said there was never the distinct odor of burning flesh. George used a bulldozer to sift through the ashes of his home, searching for any fragment, any piece of bone or tooth that could prove his children had died there. He found nothing. Not a single biological remnant of the 5 children was ever recovered from the site. This was the first major red flag that fueled the family's suspicion. Their doubts only grew as they started piecing together strange events leading up to the fire. A few months earlier, a stranger had come to their house looking for work and pointed to the back, warning George that his fuse boxes were a fire hazard. George, proud of the wiring he just had installed, dismissed him. Oddly, another man, an insurance salesman, had tried to sell George a policy. When George declined, the man became angry and warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed, attributing it to the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. This was a chilling reference to George's vocal criticism of the Italian dictator, which was not popular in their community with a large Italian immigrant population. The night of the fire itself was full of anomalies. The eldest son, John, who was one of the first to escape, later admitted he saw someone on the highway looking at the fire, before running to a neighbor's house to call for help. A woman who ran a hotel between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed she saw the children on Christmas morning. She said a car with Florida license plates had pulled up, and 4 of the 5 children were with 2 men and a woman, all of Italian extraction. She said she tried to talk to the children, but one of the men turned and gave her a hostile look, and she backed away. The Sodders believed this sighting was credible. Then came the discovery of the ladder. It wasn't just missing, it was found at the bottom of a 75-foot embankment, far from where it should have been. And what about the phone line? A telephone repairman confirmed that the Sodders' phone line appeared to have been cut, not burned, which could explain the mysterious wrong number call and the inability for neighbors to get through to an operator. Was that call a deliberate act to make sure someone in the house was awake before the fire was set? And what about the strange object Jenny found on the lawn a few days after the fire? It was a small, dark green, rotor-like object. Some have speculated it could have been a napalm-style incendiary device used to start the fire. Convinced their children were still alive, George and Jenny Sodder dedicated their lives to finding them. They offered a $5,000 reward, which they later doubled to $10,000 for any information. They hired a private investigator from Washington, D.C. named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley uncovered a shocking story. He learned that the insurance salesman who had threatened George was part of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. He also heard a rumor that Fire Chief Morris had found a human heart in the ashes. and secretly buried it in a metal box. Tinsley confronted Morris, who admitted it was true. He led George and Tinsley to the spot where he'd buried it. But when the box was dug up and the contents examined by a funeral director, the heart was determined to be fresh beef liver, untouched by the fire. It seemed Morris had planted it, perhaps hoping the Sodders would find it, accept their children's deaths, and stop investigating. This discovery only confirmed the Sodders' belief in a cover-up. Why would the fire chief plant fake evidence? Was he trying to hide something, or just cruelly trying to end the family's search? The Sodders put up a large billboard along Route 16 with pictures of their 5 missing children and a summary of the events of that night. They traveled the country following up on tips, but every lead went cold. For years, the billboard stood as a haunting public plea and a symbol of their unwavering hope. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, Jenny Sodder received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and had no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s who bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis, who would have been about that age. On the back of the photo was a cryptic, handwritten note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys, A90132 or 35. The family was stunned. The resemblance to Louis was uncanny. The same dark, curly hair, dark eyes, and facial structure. They hired another private detective to go to Kentucky to investigate the letter, but the detective took their money and was never heard from again. The family added the updated photo to their billboard, but this final, tantalizing clue led nowhere. George Sodder passed away in 1969, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny continued to wear black for the rest of her life, a constant state of mourning for the children she believed were stolen from her. She passed away in 1989. The remaining Sodder children and their descendants have continued the search, but the mystery remains unsolved. So what really happened on Christmas Eve, 1945? Was it a tragic accident, a freak combination of faulty wiring and bad luck? Or was it something far more sinister? Could the children have been kidnapped, perhaps by the Sicilian Mafia, as revenge for George's anti-Mussolini sentiments? Did someone set the fire as a diversion to abduct the children, and did local officials help cover it up, either out of fear or complicity? The planted beef liver, the cut phone line, the missing ladder, it all points to something more than an accident. The photo of the man who looked like Louis remains the most haunting piece of this puzzle. Was it a cruel hoax, or a genuine attempt from a long-lost son to make contact? To this day, the billboard is gone, but the story of the Sodder children endures. It's a chilling reminder of how a family's life can be shattered in an instant, and how the search for truth can become a legacy that spans generations. What do you think happened? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most compelling unsolved mysteries. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Until next time, stay curious.